Today on Nova Legends podcast, I have high school sports guru Matthew Hatfield of Virginia Preps. Matthew has been keeping us informed on the high school scene for, I think, more than 20 years now, but at least almost 20 years. Does a great job with all the sports, particularly basketball and football. He runs Virginia Preps, I believe, editor and publisher, Virginia Preps, Matthew.
That's
Also on the
correct.
Hash
Yep,
a podcast, also 757 Saturday Sports Talk with the Ball Coach, Coach Young, and those are both found on YouTube. Matthew, did I forget anything?
no, you hit the main points, and it's always good to be with you, Julian. It's that fun time of year, the overlap coming. We have Halloween in the books, Thanksgiving's coming up, Christmas will be here before you know it, and then you got basketball starting up. So it's that exciting, busy time of year.
That's right. Opening night was last night for college basketball too, and then we
Yeah.
got football playoffs. We got basketball started. It's going to be this is a fun time of year, plus all the
No
holidays.
time to sleep this time of year. No time to sleep.
No, especially you. You got to cover a lot of stuff. Well, I want to start with Hayfield because Hayfield up here has dominated all the news. And
Sure.
it's funny. They have a great team. It could be a great season, but the Hayfield supporters and the Hayfield detractors, we spend all
hmm
the time going after each other. For folks who have been living under a rock for the last 3 months, Hayfield is under investigation by the VHSL now. They were cleared by Fairfax County for either recruiting violations or some kind of behavior dealing with transfers to their school. It's not clear. They haven't revealed anything. Nothing has been proven to my knowledge. Maybe we'll find something out. Matthew, you're a 757 guy. Is this big news where you are? Or do you hear about this story a lot? Or is this more of a Northern Virginia story?
Oh, it's news statewide because there are folks, and I've even cautioned in some of the segments I've done through our YouTube channels and on Virginia Preps for folks that feel if Hayfield does not get the opportunity to play in the postseason, which again we don't know yet. No, and this one, let me put this out there too. For folks that think they know what's going on, they really don't. So I love these folks that are wanting to chatter. I know how this is going to play out. No, you don't. We all can pretend we do and guess we know. We don't know how it's going to play out because I think the ones involved with it, the Hayfield and the VHSL, aren't 100% as we speak at this particular time. And this might be posted later once we have a verdict. They might think they know, but nobody knows for sure. So, yes, to answer your question, though, because people know in the classics picture and looking at the rankings and the forecasts, Hayfield's the favorite in classics. And you have, I would say, 2 to 3 teams that are viewed as the next top contenders. Oscar Smith out of the 757, and then a couple Nova teams with Madison, who's played, when Coach Overton was at Freedom, them a couple times before in the state playoffs, and Battlefield, who looks like the team to beat in a very, very top heavy region 6B. I would tell you that ultimately there are teams that in class six are close to those four, but those seem to be like the four that have separated to this point as far as the big picture goes. But it's a polarizing issue and topic right now, Julian. There's other people that have hit me up that are, like you said, they're either on one side of the fence, they love Hayfield or they hate him. There's really no middle ground, unfortunately. And I'm trying to look at it from an objective perspective because in the end, I think the losers of this are the high school football fans because you want to see the best of the best. And the kids, if they don't get this opportunity to participate in the state playoffs, because I've said it publicly, I want to see Jeff Overton have a chance at the state rushing record. He's 1,000 yards away. He's the best running back or among the best running backs I've seen in the last 15, 20 years of doing this. And I think that would be some compelling storyline drama if he gets to the title game, regardless who's he against, and he's X amount of yards away from it.
Yeah. Well, Matthew, do you know? And right now, the VHSL's recommendation that they miss this year's postseason and next year's postseason is under review. They're going to, it's
Correct.
an appeals process. We may know, as you said, soon. What happens if, and I know this is a couple teams have been declared ineligible late in the season. What happens? Are the records not counted? So they reshuffle all the PowerPoints? What would be the process if, in my point of view, heaven forbid, they're not allowed to go forward?
Well, it would depend on what they actually ruled you in. So, from what my understanding is, if they say they're ineligible, they're not making them forfeit games because it's not a case of they had an eligible player in this specific game. At least that's what, from my understanding. So, I don't think there would be those wins become losses and then and impacts the entire power ratings. It would just be a little bit like what happened to IC Norcom and Portsmouth last year. And for those that aren't familiar with it, IC Norcom was ruled ineligible from a postseason incident that happened the year before against Phoebus, a fight at the end of a game. So they were just ruled ineligible for the playoffs. They were given a 1 year ban in Region 3A in Class 3. And they weren't viewed as a championship level team, but it kept them from getting what would have been a 3 or a 4 seed, I think it was. Not totally 100% sure on that. So that's what would happen, I think, under that case. It would just bump those teams below them up seeds. So you look at in 6C, I think in the latest projections, you would have your 1 seed become Lake Braddock, Fairfax, West Springfield, South County, Mount Vernon, all would just move up a peg if it came to that. So I've seen and heard different scenarios that could play out with this. Time will tell. It is what it is. But again, I think, and I've made a statement too, that it's just like in all walks of life, you may or may not agree with this. I think if someone breaks rules, like if you run a red light, you should suffer the consequences. I don't know if they have broken any rules, but in the end here, the ones that I think feel get shortchanged are the kids here. That's what I hate about this, that we don't, if that does come to that situation, if they do get cleared and everything's good to go, hey, we're going to see the best of the best go at it.
Yeah. Well, I'm going to go on the record and give my opinion of the situation because I want to hear your response to my opinion as a guy who's followed the game closely.
Sure.
Hayfield has got a lot of transfers, an inordinate amount of transfers, and really good players. And they've gone from a 500 team to one of the best teams in the DC area quickly. And it's been great. It's quite a buzz, but it has been, I'm sure, disruptive to many other schools and in other ways. I understand when people say that they have an opinion, and I get it. I think the thing that was frustrating to me was so many people were leveling allegations that were really had nothing to do with that. They were talking about bullying. It was almost like the tough Prince William kids were coming up and picking on our little angels. Just a lot of allegations were made. They're really on Coach Overton about stuff he didn't do. That was one of my frustrations. But when you have this level of transfers, it does change things. But in basketball, so many times I've seen 40, 50, 60% of a team's production come from transfers who have moved in. Happens all the time. Some of the better teams in the last several years fit this description. Most of the production are from transfers. So it happens a lot. It happens in baseball. It happens in other sports as well. I'm sure. I know details, but I'm sure. To me, if you haven't done anything wrong, if the kids are all there legitimately, which has been no evidence that they haven't been. And I think it's at one point they even said they found nothing that not one of the players has been attending the school and isn't eligible to play.
Right.
Maybe there needs to be rules about the number of transfers, or maybe local transfers, have to sit out a year unless there's a waiver process. To me, if you've done nothing wrong, there's really nothing to do. Just because you don't like the way it looks or it seems unfair, you can't really expel a team from the postseason. If you want to change the rules dealing with transfers, I think you need to change the rules. Again, there might be factors going on here that we don't know about, but that's kind of how I see the situation. Does that make any sense to you?
No, it's a fair perspective, and I could see people agreeing with that. I could see people wanting to counter it, and I do think that there is a transfer issue statewide, nationwide, in all sports, and I don't think it's entirely fair to make Hayfield for lack of a better way of phrasing this, the scapegoat of all this, because like you said, there's other sports. It could be wrestling, it could be volleyball, baseball. We know that the most popular, sports that have the eyeballs on them, especially in Virginia high school sports, are certainly football, which is viewed as king. And then a lot of times boys basketball, girls basketball, baseball, they kind of get a lot. Wrestling does get a lot of attention too, but that's where it kind of falls down on. I do think in this particular case, the other thing that makes you wonder is Fairfax County did its own separate investigation and nothing was found wrong from that. And then what comes out is that there's been a recommendation. Like you said, that's the key word there with the Virginia High School League of a postseason ban that's under review as we speak right now. So how do we get the county having an investigation? Nothing there. The Virginia High School League did their own, and they are recommending something that's different than what was. Again, would that have come out if the county had found something or had levied any type of consequences on them? You wonder about that. So again, I just feel like here's the thing, Julian. If they get through, there's going to be people saying, "Oh, they shouldn't have done it. This, that, blah, 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 blah." And if they don't, here's the problem with them not playing in the playoffs. And again, from my view of it, unfairly or unfortunately, people will say whoever gets to that title game, it can be Oscar Smith, Madison, Battlefield, D, none of the above, or other, I should say. If they win it, then there's going to be people, the detractors say, yeah, but you didn't beat Hayfield to do it. So it's almost going to take away from that team's moment if it comes to that. So that's what it disappoints me, discourages me, I guess. Here, I hate the black cloud is over this, and it's taken away from us celebrating these great teams or accomplishments, whether you're a Hayfield fan or a Hayfield detractor.
Yeah. So it could be an asterisk next to the winner. If
I mean,
they,
that's up. But let's be honest. I don't think the Virginia High School is going to put an asterisk to the record book, nor should they. But people on the outside, you know how people are naturally. They're going to say that. It's just like we've seen it with teams that don't. They'll say, "Yeah, but you didn't have to beat so and so." So if it comes to that, that's what the natural perspective and people are going to say is because, yeah, but you didn't have to go through them, which isn't fair to them because they didn't say we don't want to play them. They didn't say that.
yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
Well, let's get to the football because people are going to complain that here you go, the whole thing's about Hayfield again. I can hear it.
Right.
I want to hear your first of all before we get to the classes, and we've already touched on class 6, but I want to get your overall thoughts on the season. You know, from a 30,000-foot perspective, there's a lot of undefeated teams left in every division. I'm not sure if that's
Yeah.
normal, but in preparation for this, I went through it, and I couldn't believe so many undefeated teams are still around. That was one thing it struck me. Another thing that struck me is there are a lot of the same teams that we saw last year are right back in business, besides Galax, who hasn't won a game this year.
Yeah.
But everyone else, it seems like, you know, if you substitute Hayfield for Freedom, it's a lot of the same cast of characters that are back. But what about you? What are some of your overall thoughts on this season?
I think that's a really good way of looking at it. I do think there's a couple of new emerging threats, Julian. I mean, take, for example, just look at Class 6. One of the things I said on my Hats Hits or tweeted out is that I feel like, and I used this phrase a few years back with Occoquan Region 6C as the seatbelt region because those games would be roller coaster exciting, 36-32, 38-34. These teams from the Fredericksburg area and the Commonwealth districts, the Stafford, who had some amazing comebacks, they scored 66 one week. Riverbend, who's got a young man by the name of JoJo Thomas, who we'll get to in 5D in that same region with your Briarwoods, your Independence, your Stonebridges, put on a show. You've got Stafford, North Stafford, Brook Point, Colonial Forge, who's been a team that's been in the state playoffs before. No newbie, no stranger. They played some of the most exciting down to the wire games. I don't know if it's been the best quality, better than Nova or Tidewater or Richmond or Roanoke or wherever. And then there's some teams that are like on the come up. You say, where did Huguenot come from in Richmond in Class 4? Give a team up there in Arlington. How about Washington Liberty? I mean, what about the year they're having? It's been tremendous here to be this far in the season without the blemish and to be rolling like they have is quite astonishing for them. And they're right there below Madison in that Region 60 pecking order, and some other good teams like Langley and Westfield. So I feel like you still have a lot of your heavyweights. Phoebus on the state's longest winning streak. You see Liberty Christian back in the mix. You see Graham in Class 2. Verona, Dinwiddie, Maury in Class 5 is viewed as the hands-down prohibited favorite. But there's also a few teams that are kind of on the rise. You say, where'd they come from? So I think that's and there is a little bit of a changing of the guard because some of those powers, like you mentioned, the Galax, not having the year that they did a season ago. Riverheads isn't quite as dominant, one of the smaller schools. Stonebridge has had some losses, played a tough schedule, but they've had some losses. Highland Springs has got 3 losses, which is not like them at this time of the year. Those 3 losses, though, to Verina, Maury, and Phoebus. Great teams. So there's been some storylines, and you have the heavyweights and the favorites, but there's also some surprise stories that could make for a couple of upsets there we see in the first, second round of the playoffs.
Yeah. Well, also, Matthew, the city teams have been a threat. It's really exciting to
No
see
doubt.
this. I mean, Hampton's always been great. And there's always been teams with urban areas like GW Danville or teams like that have been dominant in football for many years. But the city was a basketball area, and they
Yeah.
dominated basketball no matter what classification. It's amazing to see TJ and Huguenot, Maury, all cities all over the place. If you go into DC, Dunbar, DC, top 20, top 15 in DC, Dunbar, Baltimore, long winning streak. It is the rise of city football. What do you attribute that to?
I don't know if it's more of an emphasis they're getting some of those athletes that would not play football that would just ordinarily play basketball, or if it's, just building the culture with those coaching staffs. I think it could be a combination of a couple of factors, those being part of the equation. But you've seen it kind of been building. Well, obviously, from Maury, they were good before they became great. They kind of took that step. Thomas Jefferson last year, you mentioned them along with, Armstrong, Huguenot, and Richmond, some of the city teams. They were good last year. got picked off in the playoffs because their starting quarterback got injured. So they get that quarterback back this year. I got a chance to watch them against Norcom, another team from Portsmouth City type environment. Good road win for them, and he was just absolutely impressive. That young man, Rashad Cherry, along with the newcomer they got from Buckingham and Amari Goff, who's one of the fastest kids in the state. And here they just beat Armstrong last week. So I feel like, and their coach Eric Harris got there. He took over what was a program that was not on, downtrodden. He's elevated them even more. And when you get your quarterback back healthy from a year ago, when you felt like you left it on the table, you take that next step. And I think that's where they are right now. So I think it's a mixture of some things. I wouldn't pinpoint just one element or aspect of it, but certainly that's another thing that's caught eyes, especially in that Richmond area. That's something that's been very noticeable.
Yeah, it's really great to see. Well, let's jump into Class 6. We've already
Mhm.
talked about it. Last year, Freedom was the state champion. The Final Four could very well return to the Final Four, even though I think Oscar Smith has probably got to be one of the favorites to win the whole thing, depending on what happens with Hayfield, especially.
Sure.
But last year, the Final Four was Freedom, Battlefield, Lake Braddock, and Highland Springs. Battlefield undefeated. Lake Braddock, if Hayfield's ineligible for postseason, Lake Braddock has got a very I don't want to say easy path, but a very doable path to the state semifinals. And then Highland Springs, who had a tough start to the season, but they seem like they're catching stride a little bit. So what are you seeing in Class 6?
Yeah, I don't know if because we're so enamored with the explosiveness of Hayfield, Oscar Smith and its name, and being back to that elite status. They were good the last couple of years, got picked off in the region semis by Western Branch and Highland Springs. That we're paying enough attention to just how good these defenses are at Battlefield and Madison. Every week they're shutting people down. And they're shutting down, Julie, not bad offenses, because let's take, for example, and Battlefield's got Patriot on deck here. Battlefield's not giving up double figure points to anybody. And Gainesville's got a really good running back and offensive attack. And they played Garfield, who just beat Patriot just this past week, and they shut them down 42-0. And I don't think we've paid enough attention to just how good their defense is. And let's, be frank about this. Battlefield's got guys that are 3-year, 4-year players. I mean, they have players that have been in these moments before. Same thing with Madison. And I think it matters when you get to this point. Now, Madison had the one bit of a scare, if you will, with Westfield. I think it was a 26-21 ball game. But outside of that, they've just been mowing people down in the early part of the schedule. They took on both Stonebridge and Lake Braddock, shut out Stonebridge, beat Lake Braddock by 3 scores, and they've been humming ever since. So I look at those two teams and I say, I think if they talk about defense winning championships, I think that's what they're going to hang their hat on. Certainly for Coach Justin Counts at Madison and Greg Hatfield at Battlefield, with those big name guys leading it, like Cole Woodson, who's going to Pittsburgh for Battlefield, and Cameron Binkowski, the Army commit, and Madison's big time player is still waiting to see where he's going to go. He was going to Coastal Carolina, and he's now since decommitted. And Mr. Nicely there running the football for him, but. Outside of that, I do think you do have some teams, 6-7 win teams. We'll touch on it with Stafford in 6B. They're a surprise story. Garfield's a nice story here. They're going to probably get a low seed, though. You look at, South County hasn't had the typical year that they're accustomed to, Julian, but I'm not writing them off entirely because last year they had the quarterback injury. They got on a run. I do think if something happened where Hayfield was not eligible, you'd make Lake Braddock the team to beat in 6C. But I'm also curious to see how the Washington Liberties and the Langleys do because, as you know, for years and years and years, the power in Northern Virginia or up in that portion, that 6D, is the Concord teams. At one point, it was Centerville, and then it was Westfield. Now it's Madison. I want to see how that matchup goes with the Concord versus the Liberty teams, whether it be a Yorktown or a George Marshall or a Washington Liberty, a Langley against one of those teams from the Concord like Madison or a Westfield, specifically in a region semi or region championship spot. So I feel like you said, those 4 favorites are pretty outlined. Madison, Hayfield, assuming they're there, Battlefield in 6B, and Oscar Smith in 6A. I'm wanting to see, is there that wild card team? I still think, I'm not running them off, Highland Springs, despite the 3 losses, they did beat Smith last year, and they lost to 3 heavyweights in Verina, Phoebus, and Maury. So I do think Lauren Johnson, who's been around the block before, I do think if he got to Thanksgiving weekend, he'll have something to say about this whole thing.
Exactly. Well, I've seen Madison play a few times this year. Been very impressed with their execution in the stretch. Westfield, I don't want to say they outplayed with Madison, but they went toe to toe. Westfield,
Yeah.
yeah, they had a 4th and 1 in the third quarter, first and goal in the third quarter. They couldn't score. That changed the game. They were up with in the last minute. Westfield is playing good ball. They got a great running back. Can't think of his name. Would not count them out. Oscar Smith. They seemed to after Phoebus kind of punched them in the face a few years ago. I think it was 48-0 or something. They seem to be reeling and not the same program they were. But they seem to be back this year, at least by their scores, completely
Mhm.
dominant. Is Oscar Smith on the same level as Maury? I mean, how good is Oscar Smith?
By the way, you're thinking of, is it Kennedy Duda, the running back for Westfield? Is that who you're thinking of? Am I
Exactly.
think
Yes.
yeah, to
Yeah.
go with Connor Moore, who's the receiver who older brother Taylor we watched for, Wake Forest dazzle there. The difference with Smith, I think, is, so Chris Scott knew last year he was going to play some youngsters. I mean, his quarterback ended up being, he had a three-way battle, and I think that's what hurt Stonebridge to start the year. They had three guys battling at quarterback, and I knew that from talking with Coach Colston back in August, and we kind of ranked him a little lower, like, ooh, this could take some time. Some of his better guys are in 2026. So Smith last year taking it in, the year before they graduated a lot of guys from their back-to-back state title teams. That the COVID year with Ethan Vasco and that crew that beat South County and beat Madison in the championship games. So they took a dip, and then last year ended up giving the reins, the keys to the car, and it was the right move at about game 5 to the freshman quarterback in Lonnie Andrews III, whose father was a record running back around 2005, 2006. Makes me
Wow.
feel old as dirt because I covered his dad, his
That's,
late father passed
well, that's a
away.
quick turnaround.
But
Yeah.
yeah, and well, he was then a sophomore, now junior wide receiver by the name of Travis Johnson. He's 6'4", Julian. He's one of the best receivers in the entire country. He's got 25 plus offers. He's dynamite, and he caught a game-winning touchdown pass last year on the final play from Andrews against Indian River, who went on to make the state playoffs in Class 5, winner Region 5A over Green Run, and a bit of a mild surprise. So he brought back those guys, and this year their defensive front is more locked in. And the other thing is their secondary is really good. They got a kid going to Cincinnati at corner in Jamari Deloach. They got a kid going to Army at safety in Jaden Dabbs. And then the younger corner on the rise, who's a junior, is Jaden Koval. He's been getting offers lately. I think Penn State might have been one of them. His older brother is Sherrod Koval, who plays at Clemson. So they have scholarship level players in that secondary to go with a more cohesive defensive front. He's got a former NFL guy, one of his assistant coaches in Eli Harold. That matters. They're getting the right tutoring in that defensive front. Giovanni Simmons was an All-American at Ocean Lakes. He's helping coach that defense with them. So you could see it. They were laying the groundwork to make a bigger and better run this year. And they also got a newcomer at running back to go with Brandon Nesbitt. Brandon Nesbitt was with them last year, battled through some injury. He's a 1,000-yard back this year. Tajay Curtis, who ran for 1,000 yards as a freshman at Kempsville, he's now at Oscar Smith to go with Nesbitt. So they have a little thunder lightning combination at running back. So a little bit more balanced and explosive offensively. They haven't been consistent on their explosiveness on offense, which I think could be their one, I wouldn't say weakness, but one thing that makes me wonder about them, because they'll have an A to A plus quarter or half, and you say they look very unbeatable, but then they kind of hit the snooze button. They did that in two games I saw, the Nansman River game and the game here more recently with Kings Fork. So if they put it together for 4 quarters, they have the ability and the talent to go win the whole thing.
Yeah. Well, it looks like it's gonna be exciting to see, and we'll have to find out whether Hayfield will be a part of that. Let's go to Class 5. Last year's Final Four, Maury was the champ, and they're back. Stonebridge was in the final. Big win last week to stay alive. They beat
Yes.
Briar Woods, whose running back got injured, but that was still a big win. Stonebridge. Somebody has some very good losses on their resume, including Quince Orchard and Dunbar, Baltimore. I would not dismiss them in the playoffs. Matoka, who's undefeated this year, was in the final last year. Indian River was in the semifinal last year. I think Matoka was in the semifinal as well. And then I know
Yep.
we got Kings Fork. It's been really tough. Anyway, Matthew, what are you seeing in Class 5?
Well, I want to put this out there because I ruffled some feathers last week on an IG live with some folks when I said Maury's the hands down favorite, and I angered the rest of the state in Class 5. Well, I'm just going to say this again. Maury still is the hands down favorite, but I don't want to say that again to dismiss the quality we have in Class 5. We have a lot of really good teams in Class 5 that if I put them in another division, they might get to the state final and win it. I just look at Maury as a juggernaut right now, and until I see someone slow them down, the closest that came to it was Wise the first game of the year. And ever since then, Maury's been building and getting better, including hammering pretty good both Highland Springs and Dinwiddie, recent state championship game participants and state championship game winners here in the last few years. You mentioned Matoka. They got a big game this week with Dinwiddie. Going to have some implications on the playoff seeding. And Matoka wants to get that 1 seed and 5 seed, Julian, because you don't want to have to go to William Fleming on the road with a really good running back in Malachi Coleman, who's going to Syracuse. Matoka's got talent at receiver spot, big time talent with Dylan Newton Short, who is committed to play his college football at UVA. I know you're happy about that. Bryce Yates as well, who's going to Pittsburgh. Montino Williams, also a UVA commit. And then off the edge, Caleb Williams, the South Carolina commit, as a game wrecker. 5D is the most, I don't know if mystery is the right word region there, Julian, because you mentioned about the injury. That affects Briar Woods if they don't have a healthy Trey Dudley. But you have Brady Carmichael, veteran quarterback, and Mike Burnett was a little bit cautious about the offensive line this year. That would keep them from, they've had a couple close losses. That game early in the year to John Champ, which they missed a field goal at the end. I remember watching that on VHS. They were right there to win that game. And then the game this past week with Stonebridge, who they've never beaten. They could see them again and finally get over that hump. They got to get over that Stonebridge hump. And then Riverbend's that sleeper team that's now the 1 seed with that JoJo Thomas kid who ran for over 200 yards. He's leading Fredericksburg in rushing. I don't know if those teams are at that level that your 5A, B, and C squads are. Just in Maury's region alone, think about this, Julian. You have Warwick, who led Phoebus in the fourth quarter last week. And Warwick's defense in the last 2 years has 12 shutouts. And they had only given up this year 28 points in 9 games. They have a really, really good defense. They just didn't match up well last year with Maury's passing attack that could stretch them out and spread them out. And you have to wonder if they'll see them again. And oh, by the way, finish up 9-1. You lose to Phoebus basically on a 4th and 8, 56-yard pass completion. Phoebus gets in the red zone with under 2 minutes to go. 3rd and 8 from the 9, and Phoebus gets a touchdown to win it on that for you, and they get a pick 6 to ice it, make it look not as close as it was, 27-17. Warwick, 9-1 with that defense. They might be the number 4 seed in 5B because you have Kings Fork, you mentioned, and Nansman River. And I wouldn't leave out Green Run. Green Run's got the offense with one of the best receivers around going to Virginia Tech and Jaden Anderson, who I think's got like 18 touchdown catches this year in 9 games. He's dazzling. Their quarterback's going to UConn and Kassan Farrar. Some names people might remember from basketball season because they helped them make the state semis in basketball too, like Farrar and Knowledge Harrell, who's going to Virginia Tech. They have to get over the Maury hurdle because Maury's beaten them twice before in the state semis. But I do think 5A is Green Run's region to win, or I should say lose. They're the favorite in that region. But Maury is the dragon there. That's the team that you look out for and you say, how do you beat them? But Matoka, I think Matoka's a great story this year. Fleming's really good. They're undefeated and they've been a nice story. And there's some teams in that 5B that, my goodness, if you put them in another region, they'd say, we like our chances. Right now, Julian, Granby is 9-0 playing Maury this week, and they're the number 5 seed in their region. They have to open up on the road in the playoffs.
Well, it's the year of the undefeated team.
Yeah, a lot of good teams in 5B. A lot of good teams in 5B.
Yeah. Well, thanks, man. Well, let's go to Class 4. Phoebus with a big win last week against Warwick, as you mentioned, is a defending state champ. And the Final Four with them was King George, Salem, and Tuscarora, who's also tough this year. And Salem 7-2. I don't know. I haven't kept up with King George, but what do you see? Matt, I did look in some of your rankings, and I see GW Danville back in football. It's great. That's great to see that name. Yeah. And I know John Champ and Dinwiddie you mentioned, Huguenot you mentioned, Varina you mentioned. Class 4 seems like a very stacked classification.
It is, and the receiver talent in Class 4, Julian, is through the roof. We talked about some of those great receivers in Class 5 with Dylan Newton Short and Bryce Yates at Matoka, Jaden Anderson at Green Run, who's going to Virginia Tech, and there's a bunch of guys from Maury, from LeBron Bond, who's going to Indiana, among many others. But Class 4, I really would love to see a rematch of that Tuscarora-John Champ game. You remember last year, John Champ had him on the ropes. John Champ's got a new quarterback this year, Brandon Pena, who came in from Stonebridge, and DeJuan Harvey's been the main beneficiary of his ability because he's got 64 catches this year, almost 1,000 yards, like 17, 18 touchdowns. He's one of the best receivers around. Then Tuscarora says, don't forget about us. Yeah, we took a blemish early to Independence, who's been building. RJ Windows' program's been building towards that level. They've been in the state semis once before during the COVID-shortened year, I think it was. But Tuscarora's got a number of guys that are going to the next level, like Dawson Poe, who's going to Boston College, and Tristan Teasdale, a safety who's headed to NC State, among others. And that's a good, I think, toss-up type of game if we get it in the region final in 4C. Huguenot's got 2 unbelievable receivers, and Ivion Lewis and Markel Dabney. I think Lewis had a 300-yard receiving game this year. And then Varina's got, to me, again, another big-time guy in Damari Carter, who makes just a highlight reel Odell Beckham, or I should say Garrett Wilson, if you watched last Thursday's Jets and Texans game, type of catches on a regular basis for Varina, who just beat Highland Springs. And they lost a game in double overtime to start the year against Indian River, but they have not just Carter on the outside, but a game changer at the nose tackle spot, and a kid named Jayshon Bull Richardson. He commands a double team. If you don't double him, he's going to wreck your whole offensive line, protection scheme, run blocking. That Region 4B is a gauntlet. I've gone on record before, and I'll do it again, that's the toughest region to get out of, especially with those big three this year of Verina, Dinwiddie, and Huguenot. I don't dismiss King George, who I thought was better last year, but they've gotten better as the years going on. That's a credit to that coaching staff and what Vern Lunsford and his assistants have done with the Foxes. Watched them win a game back in week 2 against Hampton where they were up by 28 points, almost blew the game, but I think it's made them better. And their defense has not been as leaky as it was early in the year. And their offense is always able to be creative and find mismatches to exploit. So Phoebus, though, is where you finish the conversation, because we talked about teams being a little bit not as great as they were. Salem's one of those teams, by the way. Salem, who lost them on the final play last year. They graduated the 2 All-Americans in Peyton Lewis and Chris Cole. Peyton Lewis, the running back now at Tennessee, and Cole, the linebacker at Georgia. They're still a factor, but you look at the playoff ratings, Julian, you got them in front of you. What is Salem in 4D? I think they're like the 5 or 6 seed. So
Yes.
in that region, yeah, they're not the favorite now. It seems more up for grabs. That 4D is a little bit like 5D, where it could be GW Danville, it could be Jefferson Forest, it could be Salem when it all is said and done. But I think you end the conversation with Phoebus, because when you've won now 44 in a row, and you find new ways to win games, and you go test yourself game 1 and go up to Highland Springs and hold them to 2 first downs the entire time, and you have a quarterback for the poise that Maricus Banks does. I mean, this is a kid who gets thrust in as a freshman. State championship game, it's on the line, launches an 86-yard touchdown pass to win it. And then this past week, it's 4th and 8 from your own 22. Coach calls a timeout. If this ball's incomplete, you're dead. You're done. You're not dead, but you're done. You lose the game. Throws it up into basically double coverage, and Ramir Smith comes down there for 56 yards. It's like Phoebus has that. You remember they had it back when the late great Bill D was coaching them, and then Stan Sexton. People said rabbit's foot in their pocket, but that championship aura and mystique, they just don't believe they're ever going to lose a game. So it's magnified right now. They have the heart of a champion, and it sounds cliche, it sounds corny, but someone's going to have to really stomp on them like a cockroach and beat them to knock them off right now. And there are teams that are capable of doing it, but to put together a 4-quarter game and do it, it's just so hard. And Warwick did so many things right, but you just didn't get the interception or pass breakup on a 4th and 8 play, thrown in double coverage. I mean, go figure, right?
Gosh, that was a great game. I got to check that out on YouTube,
Yeah,
the highlights. Well, let's go to Class C. Much of the same as last year. Liberty Christian's undefeated this year. They won the state last year. In the Final Four with them last year was William Byrd, who's 7-2 this year. Lafayette, I believe, is strong again this year. And Brentsville, I believe, is maybe down this year. I know also Kettle Run, TJ, Allegheny, Heritage, strong. What are you seeing in Class 3?
Yeah, we talked about some surprises earlier, and the favorite is Liberty Christian still. But there are some teams, like you mentioned, Allegheny. Didn't see them coming to have this type of year that they've had. And Desmond Jordan, their quarterback, watched some clips. He was mighty impressive in their takedown of Glenver, who had just a couple weeks before that beaten Class 2 defending state champ Radford rather convincingly. And Allegheny's looking really sharp. They're just in a really hard region to get out of. I think they wish they were in Region 3D. I think the most compelling matchup we might get or could get would be a state semifinal in Class 3 of Lafayette and Thomas Jefferson of Richmond. Lafayette's so disciplined, well-schooled, well-oiled machine. They won't be afraid of TJ, but they run their stuff well with the wing T. Their defense, they all fly to the ball well. TJ's got a lot of speed. He can hit you on the outside with some home run plays with Goff, and the quarterback Cherry's a dual threat. And I think their defense is super aggressive and underappreciated just how impactful it can be, and it might be able to make Lafayette a tad one-dimensional, although Lafayette's quarterback, who's their leading tackler in Baum Hogg, a sophomore, he does it on both sides of the ball, and I think his passing, because Lafayette's known for that wing T, might not be as recognized of how effective it can be. So that would be a great matchup if we got it. I've said all along in Class 3 that it all hinges on the health and effectiveness of Gideon Davidson, the bulldozing running back who's going to Clemson. If he's not at full strength or somebody can neutralize him and dare LC to have to throw and beat you on 3rd and longs, which hasn't really happened since Phoebus did it in the state finals a few years back when they were in Class 2 with their excellent opportunistic defense, then they could be in trouble. Heritage of Lynchburg played them to a close one-score game, but then I wonder about their psyche a little bit after losing a rivalry game in the Jug Bowl to EC Glass this past week. So it might have dropped them in terms of my confidence level. And 3D is the most up for grabs region. It's a little bit like 4D and 5D because one week I think it's William Byrd is the favorite. They lose to Laura Botetourt. I think it's Laura Botetourt is the favorite. They lose to Northside, who's got a really good two-sport athlete we watched in basketball. Michael Harvey dominate that game. And then you think one week it might be Abingdon, but they've been slipping by some teams, so maybe they're just slipping by and they're vulnerable. And Magna Vista's got a lot of offensive talent. They lost a close one to GW Danville, lost the first game of the year to Stanton River. I wonder about their defense getting enough stops in a shootout type of game, though. So that one's most up for grabs. If I have a dark horse for you, though, a dark horse that you say, all right, Matt told me about them that can make the Final Four, even somehow sneak to the championship game, watch out for Kettle Run. Kettle Run's got an experienced quarterback. They've got an experience, Jake Mulhern. They got an experienced running back in Colton Quaker, and they've been in the state championship at a higher level a couple years back in Class 4. Really well coached team. I think they're kind of laying in the weeds there. So if we pay too much attention to Liberty Christian and to TJ of Richmond and Lafayette, who have been my 1, 2, and 3s, they're the sleeper number 1, and then the sleeper number 2 is Turner Ashby. Nobody's talking about Turner Ashby. They're just rolling along here, undefeated, having one of their best seasons in school history. Again, they have 2 veteran game breakers, Bo Baylor at running back, Micah Matthews, the Virginia Tech football and baseball commit. And I think they've been knocking on the door and ready for this moment. This is kind of their last hurrah or chance to make a big splash with Matthews and Baylor. So those are 2 teams. Watch out for Turner Ashby in 3C, Kettle Run in 3B. Could be a chance one of them sneaks their way through to the Final Four or even the final game.
Oh man, it's exciting. Can't wait to see what happens. Well, let's go to Class 2, another really strong division, and lots of consistency from last year. My guess as we look at the playoffs, Radford was the defending champ. They're 7-3 this year. You have undefeated Graham's 9-0. Roland, Pocosin is 9-0. I wasn't familiar with them as a program, but 2 years in a row, looks like they're very solid. Of course, everyone knows that Riverheads is always going to be competitive. 8-2 this year, so they have. I think they're playing a tougher schedule these days because I think they went up to Class 2, I believe. So, but also Clark County's undefeated, Glenvar, Strasburg, and undefeated Buckingham, a name I haven't heard very often. So, what about you? What are you seeing in Class 2?
None of these teams are flashy, Julian. So if you're looking for airing it out or, big time plays, these are fundamentally sound, old school type of football teams. Graham does it with defense. They had like 11 sacks a couple weeks ago in their win over Lebanon. Pocosin runs the wing T. They beat Lake Tittleton again this year where they ran it 44 times, I think, and had zero passes. And they were down to their third string quarterback until just last week when Eli Tyndall came back. Now they do play some exciting games in terms of it goes under the wire. They had a 4 overtime game they won against Smithfield. And like you said, Elliott Duty's team has won the Region 2A title each of the last 2 years. I do think, though, given some of the seeds we have, this classification might be best set up for not a Cinderella to go all the way to the Final Four or the final game, but there could be a 6, 7, or 8 seed lurking that gets through a playoff round. Take King William in that region that Pocosin's in, for example. They have a low seed right now, but they've played a lot of schools in higher classifications. Buckingham's in that region in 2B where there's a lot of good teams that have about 6, 7, 8 wins. Wouldn't shock me if someone got through. And Appomattox isn't having its typical year, but if they're a lower seed, they could be dangerous. So there could be a couple surprises there. I think Graham is best built to get to the final because they have that championship pedigree and the defense and the line play, which is so essential at the Class 2 and Class 1 levels. You got to be able to run the ball and stop the run. Now, Union is a possible thorn in their side. It's a district rival. They played a close game earlier this year. It was a packed house, raucous environment there at Bullitt Park in Big Stone Gap, Virginia. They had to convert like a 3rd and 18 or 4. I watched it on NFHS, like a 4th and long play to Graham through the air to win that game when they were trailing in the 4th quarter. So they are probably on a collision course rematch in the region final, I think, in 2D, Thanksgiving weekend. The team that has, to me, the best quarterback is Brody Doyot. I know they lost that game to Allegheny, but I like what Kevin Clifford has there with him. He's a special triggerman. I think he's got Division I ability, and if you have that type of takeover player, he can carry you there like we've seen Landon Clark do for Radford last year, or you had takeover running back, which King William had a few years ago in Damon Claiborne and went to Wake Forest. Their line play's got to be solid, though, to get out of Region 2C. So last 2, and again, I talked about it with Kettle Run and Turner Ashby. The team that's not getting enough love and attention because even in 2B that they have the top seed right now, I'm not sure they're being picked to win it, is Clark County. I think Casey Childs has a team that just runs its stuff very, very well. They don't deviate from their strengths, and there's no real glaring weakness that somebody's been able to take advantage of. They've won higher scoring games. They also won a 7-6 game with Strasburg, who they might have to go through again to get through. And they got Central Woodstock, they got Buckingham in that region, so it's not going to be easy to get out of it. But they're a team that if you had to take the dark horse long shot to maybe win it, they could be the team. Push comes to shove, I feel like Graham's going to be the team that hoists the trophy, but that one's sort of up for grabs to me because I've felt all year long that Class 2 was more wide open than other divisions across the state. I felt Hayfield was a pretty heavy favorite in 6. Felt that Class 5 was Maury's, Phoebus in Class 4, that there'd be challengers, Liberty Christian Class 3, Class 2 and Class 1 a little more wide open.
Yeah, I would watch out for Clark County in the future. It's a fast growing area in Northern Virginia. So I'd imagine they'll continue to grow. Well, let's go to Class 1. Interesting. I was mentioned earlier, Galax won the state championship. Haven't won a game this year. Is that the same coach, Matthew?
Yeah, same coach. They got hit by graduation hard, and their schedule was unforgiving early, and they haven't recovered from it, unfortunately.
Well, let me get the rest of that Final Four from last year. Essex was 8-1 this. They're 8-1 this year. Alta Vista's undefeated this year. Honaker is 6-3. I think they played some Division 2 Class 2 teams. So there, it's some consistency there. When a team like Galax is 0-8, can they win their last game or two and still have strength in the postseason, or is it it's going to be too big of an ask?
I think it's too big of an ask for this year. Had they won a couple more games, I'd say they get on a roll, similar to like King William's doing right now in Region 2A. But that region, I thought it was George Wyth's. I was picking them, and then last week they got picked off by Grayson County. They were down big in that game. They had a big comeback late, and Grayson County held them off. And they have some history, all three of those teams, Galax, George Wyth, Grayson County. They've had some recent years where one wins the regular season game, they play again, and the other team wins the rematch, and that team gets hot as a 4 or 5 seed all the way to the state championship, which is what Galax did last year. All their games were on the road on their way to the title. So that could happen for a team in Class 1. And you mentioned Honaker. I'm not picking them in Class 1, but I did say Class 1 and Class 2, you run the ball, smash mouth. They're the one team that goes wide open, 4 or 5 receivers. They chuck it. They got a quarterback in Peyton Music who's putting up record-setting numbers. His brother Avery's catching the ball. Peyton Music, love that name. He should get a sponsor or NIL deal with like Mucinex or something. I don't know. But no, seriously, they have the ability to play some basketball on grass, fun games. I think, though, Rye Cove's the team you watch out for. They're really strong. East Side's another team. They had a couple injuries early, but I like what they've done. I think whoever comes out of that 1D is going to be battle tested to probably even make it to the final. I'm not even counting out Holston. And then on the other side of the bracket, 1A, 1B, I had a coach out in Southwest Virginia tell me before the year from a team camp, he said Alta Vista is going to win the whole thing. I said, really? He said, I'm telling you, we went up against them. Their running back is special, and he is, LaDainian Stone. And they have linemen, and they do what they do very, very well. And they lost last year a close state semifinal to Essex. Now, I picked Alta Vista to start the year number 2. They had to come from behind game 1 against Central Lunenburg, and they've kind of had a revolving door at quarterback. But Stone has got 4,000-plus yards in his career. He's one of those running backs you can depend on. I think they come out of 1B. I'm fascinated to see who comes out of 1A because Essex was the hands-down pick. Now, their starting quarterback, who, if you might recall last year, I talked about it so much, he went from starting center 2 years ago to quarterback in Zay Bundy. He matters on defense. He missed the first few games of the year, but Essex was just whacking people. Then they got picked off by Rappahannock 13-8. Could be a little bit of a Union Graham situation like in 2D. They might run into each other again on Thanksgiving weekend. It might not be the same outcome. Could be a similar type of low-scoring game. Could twist the other way to Essex. So I'd be curious to see if we get that rematch of Alta Vista Essex. Has Alta Vista passed them? I do think that winner of, if they happen, could win the whole thing. 1D, you got about 3 or 4 choices you can pull out of there. And in 1C, I like Grayson County despite some of the close losses. They played a good schedule. It's pretty wide open, but of all the teams, if you really put my feet to the fire, I'm liking what I'm seeing from Alta Vista. I think it could be their time. And they're a program, Julian, that's not that far removed from winning state championships in both football and basketball. You go back to Juan Thornhill, for example.
Alta Vista is like suburban Lynchburg. Is that right?
Yeah, it's in that area.
Okay. Yeah. Well, great. Well, look, that's a great recap as always, Matt. Real quickly, I want to remind folks, you're the voice of Old Dominion women's basketball. I know you work with on the men's side as well with Dave Torzik. Is he still doing it, Matthew?
We did well. I filled in for Ted Alexander when he's got football responsibilities, but Dave is actually since retired. He was actually got the chance to catch up with Dave. He was in town for the Virginia Squires reunion we had back in the spring at the Hall of Fame. That was awesome that they
That's
did that reunion over there in Portsmouth. In fact, they were recognizing all the great Squires like Dr. J and Julius Erving. But it's Ted Alexander and Dennis Wolf on the men's side. But I'm doing the women's games with Shauna DeBerry. And yeah, it's that overlap time of year. We just lost our first game on the women's side to Ball State. Men lost a game basically at the buzzer to Buffalo by a whisker in Mike Jones's debut. Mike Jones, people know from DeMatha when he was there, and then coached at Virginia Tech in Maryland as an assistant, former ODU Monarch standout. So fun times. We got that going on, and I know you're juiced up for everything with hoops and football as well as it's getting closer and closer to the playoffs for everything.
Well, like you guys, we lost our coach. You lost Jeff Jones in midseason. We lost ours right before the season started this year.
Yeah.
Real quickly, I've been talking college football, but I've never given ODU their due in college football. Fill us in on what's going on with ODU football.
Yeah, so I got a chance to go to their game a couple weeks ago. They played a Thursday night game, televised game, I think on ESPN2 against Georgia Southern. Won it. They made a quarterback change, and it's actually done them some good offensively because they were kind of stuck in a rut to a degree. And since Ricky Ronnie and company have been a little bit crisper on that side of the ball, and they have a big matchup coming up with James Madison coming up on the is that what day is that? That is the 16th. I was about to say the 12th. All my days run together. The 16th, a week from Saturday. And they've not been able to beat James Madison lately. But that new quarterback, Colton Joseph's got 10 touchdowns, 3 interceptions. They're starting to find some more players around the state. I think it's been a little bit of a trying task for them because a lot of our players in the state are looking at the Power Fives, or they might not be good enough for, say, Old Dominion's level and say the Sun Belt. So I think just trying to find the right fits. But Isaiah Page has been great for them. He out of Verona, he's been tremendous. And defensively, they've shown some bend but don't break. Had a close loss, if you remember, back in week 1 to South Carolina down in Columbia. Basically had that game and just had some miscues on the offensive side of the ball. So they clean that up. They can go bowling. They're 4-5 right now. Got 3 games to go with this one with James Madison a week from Saturday. It's a home game. Then they host Marshall. Then they go to Arkansas State, and Arkansas State's still in line to possibly play in the Sun Belt championship game. So that might have a lot of meaning for both teams, for the Monarchs to go bowling and for Arkansas State to potentially reach the conference championship game. So the new world of college football, as you know, it's not quite the NCAA tournament, but with 12 teams going to the playoff, it keeps a lot of your group of 5 teams, whether you're a fan of ODU or JMU or Liberty or fill in the blank, fan of Army, Navy, fan of Boise State, alive to the very end. Whereas years ago, it's just you pretty much know it's going to be Georgia, Alabama, Ohio State, and fill in the blank, right?
Exactly. Well, Matthew has obviously a Virginia Preps, which you can find online. He covers all these sports, but he does great interviews on his podcast, On the Hash, 757, Jeff Jones. I mean, you just have so many, big names, local guys, but also you cover the whole state. Why don't you make sure people can know where to find you and what time you guys go live?
Appreciate that. Well, we ordinarily go live at about 9:30 or 10 a.m. Eastern, but that sometimes is impacted by me having a basketball game to call or me having a football game to go cover or Coach Young having something to go do, go to some concert, go to some dance, go to some, luncheon speaking engagement. So if you can't catch us around 9, 10 a.m. Eastern till about 11, 12 a.m. Eastern on Saturday mornings, we're always archived. You can find it live or on demand on Cova Sports TV, which is on YouTube. We also pin the shows up later on VirginiaPreps.com. We're part of the Rivals Network powered by Yahoo Sports. Encourage folks to check us out for free. If you like it, try a trial. If you like it even more and love it, subscribe. It's only $100 for the year, $10 a month. You'll get a lot of bang for your buck and all the high school sports and recruiting coverage as well. Various sports. We cover public, private, the whole shebang. And they can follow me on social media too, on Twitter or X as they call it, at Hatfield Sports. And if you give that follow to Cova Sports TV, you'll get all kinds of notifications when we go live with different sporting events and our podcasts and our shows.
And On the Hash is also on Cova TV.
Yep, we do that usually on Wednesdays or Thursdays. We've been breaking down some games. We'll have a little bit more of a breakdown on the playoff picture, both locally and statewide with that, and we'll do some predictions and some fun things with that. Players of the week, coach of the week, the type of thing. So yeah, they can find that on there as well.
Yeah. Well, great, Matt. As always, this is great. You do an amazing job giving these kids exposure, coaches exposure, and just letting fans like me know what's going on throughout the state. I mean, I've been watching football more closely in the last few years, and you know the players much better than me, and you're 150 miles away plus. But anyway, I really appreciate you taking the time to talk to me. I know you're busy let's keep in touch and do this again real soon.
Absolutely. And likewise to you, Julian. We appreciate all that you do to give the athletes, coaches, and teams their spotlight and their just due. And we'll definitely do it down the road.
It sounds good, Matt. Have a great day now, buddy.
You too. Take care.
Safe travels.